This is Tommy's Outdoors 116. Our guest today is Zephyr Sincerny. Zephyr is an outdoorsman, outdoors guide, outdoors educator, and originally this episode was meant to be about bow hunting. You probably know from the previous episodes that I'm trying to bring a lot of information about bow hunting, especially to my Irish and UK listeners, and clear out some of the misunderstanding or miscommunication maybe as it pertains to bow hunting, that bow hunting is inhumane or less humane than rifle hunting. So that was the idea of this episode. And we get together with Zephyr. And by the way, big shout outs to great friend of the podcast, Moose Mutlo, who was our guest in episode 109. He gets us together. So we sat down with Zephyr, and it quickly turned out that Zephyr lives such a interesting and fantastic lifestyle that it would be really unfair to only dedicate this episode to bow hunting. And so we start talking, how he lives in Alaska. And it turns out a fantastic episode, very multi-dimensional episode where we talk about climate change and subsistence living and hunting and fishing, and also about bow hunting towards the second part of the episode. Extremely interesting episode, and I had a great pleasure talking with Zephyr. He's such a wonderful soul. So yeah, I'm pretty sure you will enjoy this episode, whether you're a hunter or maybe you're just interested in subsistence living, or maybe you're just interested in, how people live in other parts of the world, Alaska in this case. So I'm sure you will enjoy this episode of the podcast. And if you do, leave the rating. You can rate the podcast on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. Leave the 5-star rating. That's a great help for me and for the podcast. And if you want to support me personally, as usual, buymeacoffee.com/Tommy'sOutdoors. I'm editing those episodes extremely early in the morning. I mean, like 5 a.m. in the morning, just to bring them to you and then keep up with all the other stuff that goes in my life. So coffee is very much required, and you can help me by buying me a coffee. buymeacoffee.com/Tommy'sOutdoors. Link in the description of the show. And now, without any further delay, Zephyr Sincerny and subsistence living in Alaska. Zephyr, welcome to Tommy's Outdoors. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tommy. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, and I'm excited to talk with you.
Oh, man. How's things in Alaska right now?
Well, I'm in Haines, Alaska, which is southeast Alaska. So the northern end of the Inside Passage. So inland waterways, and we have mountains coming straight up out of the ocean. We're having a pretty cold and snowy winter this year for us. Today it's about 10 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And fortunately, we have sun. Not something we get a lot of here, but it's sunny and cold. We have about 3 feet of snow on the ground. And so I've been spending the last, a lot of my time and energy lately goes into snow plowing and sanding the roads and keeping the house warm.
I gotta ask that question. Do you see because obviously you live there for many years? Do you see the effects of climate warming or changing in any way compared to what was like a number of years ago?
Yeah, definitely. Interesting thing is you can talk to some of the old timers from around here and they'll tell you, 20 years ago even, that we used to have snowfalls which were much more significant than they are now. So all winter. And one of the biggest things that we're noticing, which is really, I find very interesting. I do a lot of backcountry snowboarding. We're very rural here. There are no ski lifts anywhere around. So if you want to ski or snowboard, you're doing it yourself. And one of the things that we pay a lot of attention to is avalanche conditions, right?
Right.
And we've been collecting, we have a Haines Avalanche Center, and they've been collecting data and watching it. And in the last essentially 15 years, but even in the last 7 to 5 years and closer, what we're finding is that we'll get a storm and it'll be cold, and we'll get cold snow, really good cold snow all the way down to sea level. And historically in Haines, you had a snowpack that you could safely ski from the top of the mountain, say, for 4, even 5,000 feet up down to sea level, and you could ski the whole way down, and your avalanche conditions would be fairly consistent until the very bottom. What we're finding now is that the storms come in, we'll get a cold storm like that, and you'll be able to ski all the way down, no problem. And then the next wave will come through, we'll get a low pressure, and the rain level, the snow level will go way up. So now you're getting rain crusts and freeze crusts much higher on the mountain, which is where you typically want to be skiing and snowboarding. And so that's essentially increasing the avalanche danger significantly in the areas where people are recreating. So that's one example, is that those snow levels on those storms are coming up much higher than historically. You can also see around this area, I get out on the boat a good bit and do some sailing, and when we go by glaciers, I can see glaciers actually out my front window right across the river, and you can see significant, huge areas where the glaciers have receded in the last 100, 50, 20, 10 years, and especially in the last short time, they've been receding, much more quickly. And you can see, it's very obvious evidence of that. So definitely noticing that in the climate shifting and storms being different. And also,
how storms are different.
Well, like I was saying, we'll get the cold storm will come in and snow all the way down, and then it'll be followed by a really warm storm. Whereas maybe historically that would have stayed, the air would have stayed colder. You would have had a colder snowpack and essentially more snow all winter, less rain. And that seems to be fairly consistent with a lot of climate change in the US, is that those snow levels are rising, and wintertime snowpack high in the mountains that used to stay all summer, for example, take the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. That used to be kind of they would have a snowpack all winter long, which would provide water throughout the summer for the Central Valley, which is one of the biggest food producing regions in the world. And that snowpack is less consistent now because of those higher snow lines in the winter.
I'm glad I asked you, because you gave us such a interesting and comprehensive answer. But I mean, like, this is real. I don't know if you know, but surely listener of my podcast know I come from Poland. So even in Poland, the winters I remember as a kid, we had like a -10, -15 Celsius, and snow everywhere, and we were playing in the snow and all that, and that is not happening anymore. Simply, there's like a little bit of a snow here and there, especially in the central region where I was born. That's not happening anymore. So that definitely is going on. Listen, man, the question I usually ask people in podcasts, but especially with someone that's so interesting as yourself, how do you? Is it like a two-part question? The first part is like, how would you describe yourself? How you describe yourself as an educator, as a guide, as like what? How do you? And I know, like, people might not like to label themselves, but surely, you recognize yourself as maybe educator, maybe outdoors guide. And second part of this question is like, you living such a fascinating outdoor lifestyle. And how did that happen? You know, that you have this awesome lifestyle, and not, you know, in the cubicle or in the office, you know, whether it was like from the very beginning, you were just straight on this path, or whether something happened in your life and then you ended up in Alaska doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I think some of both. Um, uh, yeah, so I would consider myself an educator for sure. Um, I've spent I've spent I've spent about 20 years or so in the outdoor education field. Some of that has been doing teaching field science education, or and then also that has been working with. Well, I worked with Outward Bound for nearly 10 years, leading sea kayaking and mountaineering trips in Washington State in the North Cascade Mountains. And I also worked in Yosemite National Park with NatureBridge and school age students. I've done some substitute teaching and a lot of things. So when I'm in the outdoors, I love to share it with people. And that's been my biggest passion throughout life, is a being out there myself and connecting and finding new ways to connect with the natural world, and then sharing it with people. That lights me up. Like, I love it. And that ties through, though I'm not working in those fields currently, that's still passion for me. um, and I have worked as a guide and done that. And it's a very fine line, I would say, between like outdoor education and trip leading and guiding. Um, Whether I'm being acting as a guide or an educator, or as a trip leader or an instructor, I feel like I always tend towards the instruction mode. I would rather be out with somebody and be sharing things with them, trying to give them tools so that they can be empowered to learn to be outside comfortably, to live outside, to handle adverse conditions, to enjoy, the place that you're at or whatever's going on. So that's my passion. And right now I'm fortunate enough to start being able to do that with my 2.5-year-old daughter,
Oh
and
wow, that's
my
great.
partner. So yeah, currently I'm a stay-at-home dad, and so I spend a lot of time with my little girl, and like I said, keeping the house warm, cooking the meals, trying to keep it clean, and keeping our water system running, and our all the different things. So that's what I do.
You're also interested in like a subsistence living, right? You're growing your food, your vegetables and stuff.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, and I feel like that is connected with the second part of your question of like how did you get in? How did I get into this? Um, I grew up on a commune in Southern Oregon, and so that was a very alternative lifestyle. We lived a mile from the nearest paved road, and there was a group of families that each family had their own household, and we had a great big community garden that everybody would work in and chip in, and that's where a big part of our food came from. So there was a lot of shared responsibility by the adults in that. It might be that one person was doing childcare, taking care of the kids that day, so that everybody else could go work on X that needed to be done in the garden, or building a new shed, or whatever that might be. So I grew up in rural Southern Oregon, very alternative lifestyle. And then when I was about 10 years old, we moved to the town of Ashland, so a reasonably sized town. And the reason I share those pieces is because I think that for me, being outside and feeling very a part of and connected with the natural world has been always been there. I spent so much of my time outside, and I that's definitely shaped my path in life.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
And what a better place than Alaska now to
Yeah.
enjoy this type of lifestyle.
Yeah, and I've always been attracted to Alaska. When I was in high school, I was thinking like, okay, am I going to go to college or do something else? And I was like, no way. I'm not. I don't need. I don't want to spend any more time in school. I'm going to Alaska. I'm going to go to Alaska, and I'm going to build a cabin and go fishing. Like that's it.
Wow. So
Um,
that was like from the very that you were just that was like from an early day that was your plan and there you
That's
go.
that's like 14, 15, 16-year-old Zephyr. However, that's not what I did. Um, so that was my dream, and then I think it was just before I graduated from high school. I was like, ooh, you know what? I think it makes a lot of sense to go to college. I have the opportunity to do that right now, and it seems like that would be a really wise thing to do. So I went to university and had a great time. And so life has taken me many paths since then. A little while after that, I started getting into outdoor education, and that was my passion and what I did for a long time. Finally, when I moved up to Alaska, I was working in Yosemite National Park for NatureBridge, and I had started as an instructor in the field and a campus manager, and I did that for a long time and a lot of trip leading, and um, I was moving kind of up in the ranks, so to speak. So I was doing more and more management, and I was then in the office, and kind of like you said, in a not a cubicle, but in an office in front of a computer on the phone all the time, and it it wasn't filling me up. I was like, this isn't where it's at for me. I got to do something else, and I just happened to have the opportunity, so I took off and went to Alaska. I was
There you
my
go.
stuff in storage. I loaded up my truck and I cruised up to Alaska. I'd been up here. Well, I first started coming to Alaska when I was just out of college. I came up and did some commercial salmon fishing. And I'd come back numerous times with friends to just visit and hike. I did my first sea kayaking trip. Me and a friend paddled, did about a 200-mile, 6-week sea kayaking trip in Southeast Alaska. So I kept coming up here and enjoying and just being pulled in more and more. And so finally I was like, I got to go. So that was about 6 years ago when I came up here, and I was just bouncing around, checking stuff out, looking for places where I thought I'd like to settle, picking up some guiding jobs here and there just to stay afloat. And it was great fun. And then I kind of settled up here in Alaska, worked for a heli ski organization for a little while, and then found my way here to Haines. Um, yeah,
That's
and
very man. You're living the dream. In other words, you're living the dream.
yeah. And so what that has led for me is, like we were talking about, I've always been really connected with the outdoors. And it's interesting. I hear the expression when people sometimes say, I'm going into nature. And that to me sounds so odd because in my gut, in my stomach, I believe that we all are nature. So how can I go into something that I am? It's not this thing that is outside of us. We're a part of it. And I think that's a really interesting juxtaposition that we find. And so for me, that connection is I'm a human animal, right? I'm a human animal and I'm part of nature. We're part of nature. So when I go walk out my front door, I'm not going to a foreign place.
This is quite often we talk about is like people these days they are kind of totally disconnected from nature. And
Yeah.
this is one of the things that you're just talking about, that
Yeah.
oh, then I go to nature, like this is something separate,
Yeah.
right? There's like, here's the doors and here's nature, and now we're coming back from nature and we're like
Right.
something else.
Right.
That's quite common, let's say, complaint, or quite common observation,
Yeah.
that people who are into outdoors, into hunting and fishing and so on, have these observation, and from that there's a lack of understanding really of nature. You're obviously also not only growing your food, you're also hunting and fishing, right?
Yeah. So that has, right. So being in Alaska for me, like I've always I've always been and wanted to be in touch with my food. Right. I use my body throughout my life. I've used my body for my work. What I'm doing outdoor education. I'm outdoor every day, trip leading. I'm out all the time. What all my favorite jobs, I've always been outside. My body is what I use for work, a big part of it. And I've found that what I put in makes a big difference of how I feel physically, what I'm doing, what's going on. And I think, especially since I started hunting, I actually have started to feel that even more and more and become more mindful of it. And so that draws me to, when I know where my food is coming from, I know that it's healthy, and it increases the intimacy with that situation, that animal, that place, and it makes me healthier. Like there is no doubt in my mind that if I eat more or highly processed foods, those are not things that the human body is actually designed to consume and process. Our bodies are pretty incredible at processing all different kinds of things, but when I'm closer to that, I can, like, I feel it. I feel my
Yeah,
health.
I even read the book where the author was describing how even if you're eating beef, and even if there's a slow grown pasture fed beef, all the best things, still those animal act and behave differently than wild animal,
Mm-hmm.
even in the sense of they're not self-medicating, eating different herbs and stuff like that. And then it was like a fascinating description of how that impacts the hormonal system of these animals, how it impacts fat production of these animals, like how that fat is different, and then in turn when we eat that, how our body process differently those different fats from those animals.
Yeah.
And it was it was, one on one hand it was fascinating, and on the other hand it was kind of depressing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like how difficult it is to get a good food. And people fortunate enough who live in the areas like you, where you still have access to wilderness or wild animals who live there. That's great. And like I live in Ireland, or people who live in the UK, a lot of them, like are proud of, I use that word, or happy that they have an opportunity to hunt and
Mm-hmm.
harvest deer and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the truth be told, those deer, they're living in the farmland, they're living in the in between the commercial forestry, so they also
Yeah.
are already impacted into by what we so it was kind of sad. But at the same time, it's I think that the more here we say educate people. And I just, by the way,
Yeah.
I'm just like, you're a perfect guest for my podcast, because this is all about educating people about outdoors and what's up.
Yeah.
The more people know about it, the more they will, number one, have a better food choices, make a better food choices. Number two, really put pressure on food production,
Mm-hmm.
demanding better food, demanding even if it's a simple things, right? I'm not going to buy those hamburgers that are made of God knows what, I'm gonna opt for beef from a farmer.
Right.
So we could see the cows and so on.
Yeah.
So listen. So tell me, are you like living off completely of the wild game, or how
So
does it work? Do you have like a big massive freezer, and then you
yes.
try to fill up the freezer in the season, and then you kind of basically living off that?
Yeah. Several freezers. Um,
Oh, sorry.
um, yeah. So I, f- I feel really fortunate to have found and settled in Haines, Alaska. It's a place that still has fully intact ecosystems right outside the door. Like we have ecosystems with megafauna like moose and black bears and brown bears, all the way up to wolves. What that tells me is if we have apex predators like wolves in our ecosystem, that means the rest of that ecosystem, that food chain, so the water, the environment, the food sources, those are all intact. I feel really lucky to be in a place where that is still happening. We still have barely 5 species of Pacific salmon. The king salmon on the river right out front, the Chilkat River, are pretty low numbers and definitely on the edge. But so we have that. We have moose. We have deer a ways down the canal, down the fjord, and with that, I am able to live a lifestyle right now, which is, I'd say, it's a quasi subsistence. So I do as much subsistence as I can. I'm here. It's one of I think maybe one of the few places in the world, but at least one of the few places for sure in the U.S. where, as a resident, I can go and do subsistence fishing for salmon, and that allows me up to 50 sockeye per season. I think it's 50 coho and even more chum and pink salmon than that. So I use a 300-foot gill net and I have a 16-foot aluminum skiff, little motorboat that I use to fish on the ocean with. And you can also use a net in the river. So I'll have a smaller net. And so in the summertime, usually in July and beginning of August, um, me and my family, we end up fishing and putting up um, 50 to 80 salmon, and I fillet a lot of them and then freeze them, and then I do a lot of what we call fresh pack canning, so mason canning jar, and just cut the fish into pieces and put it in there and then can it. And then I also do a lot of I smoke some of the fish and then can them, or vacuum seal them. So we do that with salmon, and that's a really big food source for us. We will eat salmon for all year long, and it's one of our biggest food sources. We probably I eat salmon probably uh, between 1 and 3 times a week, depending on the week.
That's a big thing, Mike. Man, I'm so jealous because this is, like you said, this is a source of health, like physical and mental.
It's incredible. Yeah, it's incredible what been talking about. Healthy, healthy, healthy food. They're wild salmon. I'm catching them and processing them within a day or two. Um, and yeah, so I mean the quality of meat is great, and the nutrients that I'm putting into my body and my daughter and my lady, like it's incredible. And and it also brings me so much connection. I feel so grateful and so thankful, like every time I take a salmon out of the freezer, every time we sit down to dinner and I take a bite of it, I know where that fish came from, and it was my hand that took it out of the water, and killed it and bled it. And every time any animal that I harvest, I say a prayer for it and I give thanks at that time.
And people who listen to that, I just want to say, don't go and don't buy farmed salmon. That's not a sin. The farmed salmon is it's the opposite to what Zephyr is saying. We do this, and I think this is a big part of what now people have started to wake up how just terrible for both environment and for your health the salmon farming is.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to say that for people who listen to that and they just getting expired, just don't go to the shop and buy a whole bunch of packed salmon. It's not the same.
And it's really it's a real challenge, because it comes back to, I think, something that you alluded to a few minutes ago, and that was not everybody has the opportunity or lives in a place or has the time or this the skill and experience to go harvest their own salmon. We live in a world where that's not actually it's not sustainable for everybody on the planet to do that. And so how do we find ways for many people to eat salmon, but also not have to rely on a farmed fish that isn't being good for the environment or isn't being as high quality, And so, one of the ways right here that we're talking about is, if you're hungry right now and you're like, oh, salmon sounds good, go to the market and look at the label on that and take a few minutes to figure out where that fish is coming from. If it's a wild caught Alaska salmon, that's a good fish to eat. If it's a wild caught from somewhere else in the world, that's also probably that's a good fish to eat. In Alaska, we have the expression, you'll see bumper stickers around, friends don't let friends eat farmed salmon.
Oh, really? That's a good one.
So I'm on board with that.
Good. We need those.
Don't buy a farmed salmon. If you really need it that bad, let me know. I'll see if I got an extra piece of salmon for you.
Oh man, but you're touch on the important problem here, because and I don't even want to go there, because that's a material for another episode of the podcast, or maybe 10.
Yeah,
but with those wild salmon, obviously, I said many times that what's going on in the United States is probably gold standard on fisheries management and sustainability. Although I'm sure you know that the bud and the ugly as well, because I'm guessing it's not all perfect. But then there are other fisheries of wild salmon that are just straight up unsustainable. Mm-hmm. And with a growing population, so it's just tough. Let's leave it at that.
We will. So that's a big part of our subsistence, and that's a significant chunk of our food. Another really special fish that I rely on, not as heavily but significantly, is here we call them the Hooligan. So not a football hooligan, but a fish. And
I heard the name. I cannot connect visually, but I heard the name Hooligan. It's like one of the names of the fish, right?
Yes.
Give me another name of that fish.
Eulechon, and Eulechon is the more of a formal name. I think that's the actual name of the fish. Eulechon, Hooligan, often called candlefish. And they're a type of smelt. So typically a 6 to 9 inch long fish. You might consider a bait fish, a silverfish. The thing that kind of sets them apart is they have an incredibly high fat content, essentially. And the native folks that have lived in this area for the last 3,000 plus years relied very heavily on the Eulechon or the Hooligan to get them through the winter. They would, and people still do this, but they would take and harvest a bunch of the fish and essentially let them ferment for a while and let the oil separate out and then store the oil. And throughout the winter, that's one of the big ways people survived in this area through these harsh winters is because they had an incredible fat source that they could store. So the Chilkat Indians, Native Americans in this area were very rich in that way. And so anyway, it's again, I feel so blessed and fortunate to be living now, and we still have a strong hooligan run on both the Chilkat and the Chilkoot rivers, which are one is right outside my door and the other's a couple miles away.
Is that also seasonal? Is it like a season that you can catch, or the season that they show up then you can catch, or is it like year long?
Exactly. They come to spawn in the rivers um, April, end of April, beginning of May, typically. And we go down to the river, and you just can take a little dip net and dip them up. And they're great to bring home. Usually, what I do with mine is I bring them home, I brine them, and then I smoke them. And they're delicious. And they're a great snack. So, like afternoon, if I'm getting hungry, 2 o'clock, I eat one or two hooligans, and that'll keep me going until dinner time.
Man, snacking on hooligans, that's life.
Yeah, so that's a really unique and special fish here as well. And those are the two big subsistence fish that I go for. There's also halibut, and a lot of people do subsistence fishing for them. And we get a little bit of halibut from some friends, do some trading and get some halibut. I just haven't gotten it together to go set up my own rig and do that yet. I would like to.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, man. You got to do it. You got to do it. They're like, yeah, Alaska, halibut.
Yeah. Well, also you have to be pretty mindful of the mercury content with the halibut. The bigger,
oh, really?
Yeah, the bigger fish are going to have a higher mercury content, and they're not the ones you want to eat. I would want to eat anyway. If I were to catch a big halibut, I want it to go back in the ocean because they're the ones that are producing way.
There are females, right? Those biggest, those big halibuts, they're all females.
I think usually the biggest ones are.
Yeah. So that's why they're pretty old, and that's why over the lifetime they accumulate mercury in their bodies. That's
exactly. So you get get a 10, 20 pounder. They're great. So yeah, and I also do some crabbing and a little bit of shrimping. Same thing. I haven't gotten way into that just because there's summertime's crazy here. There's so much going on. You want to do a million things, and but that's also a good food source that we've tapped into a few times.
What part of your diet is wild game? Like a big game, hoofed animals. I don't know, bear. You hunting bear as well, right?
I haven't been hunting bear. There are a lot of black bear here, and I definitely consider that, and that's something that I am interested to do. Up to this point, I've been hunting other animals and been able to get plenty of food, so I haven't needed to do that. I think if there was,
I guess that's the difference between a hunter who goes from a place and they want to tick off the list a bear, a moose, and this and that and that. Well, for you, it's like different because you're like, okay, I'm doing that for food. Like I have plenty of food. I don't need to do.
Yeah.
So I guess your mindset is quite different how you approach hunting.
Yeah, and that's something that I've noticed as I moved to Alaska and have gotten even more into it. I was into providing as much of my own food as I could previously, but it's more of my way of life now. And yeah, for me, it is about being outside. It is about enjoyment. I love being outside and doing it and hunting and fishing. And also it is about, it's about the food for me in a big way. So yeah, you're right. Like if I'm hunting other animals and I have enough meat for the year, I don't need to go hunt a bear or whatever. But at the same time, sometimes it gets lean, and you're like, okay, what animal can I get right now? Um,
Yes, that's the other side of it.
and I'm in a place where, if I don't if I'm not living an entirely subsistence based life. So if I'm not able to get that food, I do buy things, from the market, from the supermarket, and you know,
So you're not religious about it. You just keeping healthy balance, and when you can, you do, and when you don't, you're not going on a hunger. It's like, no, I'm not eating anything else.
right. Well, and you know what I've noticed in myself that actually in the last several actually since I started hunting, if I don't have game meat, I just won't eat meat in my diet. Right now, as I said, we do go to the market, and I buy some bacon sometimes, and buy a sausage because I can. It's easy enough, it's easy, and buy a chicken, and when I'm doing those things, I try to look at the label, and I look at it, and I figure out, like, oh, is this a free range? Is this, and what does that mean? And one of the big things I try to look at is how far from me is it? And I try and buy things that are as close as I can get. I'd rather buy something that comes from Washington State than from, uh, Vermont, just because it has, I think, a smaller impact on the whole picture. So, but oftentimes I just won't eat meat then, you know.
And that's another thing. You have plenty of fish, and then I think that in general in life it's important to not get too entrenched in some idea that you have to do this or you have to do
Mm,
that, and be flexible. And
yeah.
I guess our this is healthy for our bodies as well, because our bodies are also built to go through these changes, right? Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that is very let's say in fashion these days in a fitness industry and so on, is the intermittent fasting and all that.
Hmm.
And that only comes from the fact that our body was just built for the periods where we don't have much food and we're fasting, and the certain processes are happening in our body. It's natural.
Right.
And if you think about it, being fed well all the time is not natural because
Right. Right. Yeah.
it didn't happen for like thousands and thousands of years that you always had a food in the freezer, right?
Right. You got
So surely your body built stuff to for
three
those occasions.
three good sized meals a day with snacks in between has not always been the norm.
Exactly.
um,
Exactly. Oh,
and,
I'm starving, right? And it's like, no, people can go 30 days without food. You're not
yeah.
starving because you didn't have your breakfast.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's true.
Uh,
It's important not to be dogmatic about it. Yeah.
Oh, that's the word I was looking for. Dogmatic. Yep, exactly. Zephyr, listen, and so what percentage of your like I because I'm when I'm heading with that, I heard that you'll be on some exciting moose hunts as well. So
Yeah.
I guess like a moose is gives you meat for like entire year. Like how how
Uh,
how much is it?
I'm not.
I was talking with a hunter from Sweden. I think it was episode 77, and they doing this moose hunt.
Mhm.
But number one, I think that the Swedish moose is like smaller than the one that you get on Alaska, and then
Yeah.
there's like a group hunt, so they're have a rules how they split the meat, and the
Oh,
the
cool.
one who shot the moose takes organs, like a liver and so on, and then the rest, they cutting it, they putting in the
Hmm.
piles, and so they have a rules how
Hmm.
they split the
Hmm.
meat. But is it similar in your case? Or are you just getting your rifle or your bow, and you're snowboard and you're going into the mountains to harvest a moose.
I have dreamt of hunting caribou from my skis, but I haven't done that yet.
Wow.
So for moose, I'm relatively new to hunting moose. I think I'd say I've hunted pretty hard 2 seasons and then a little bit in a couple other seasons. So I'm really still learning it, and it's a really interesting hunt. And I'm learning so much about moose and their habitat and how they work.
Mm.
Because to be a successful hunter, that's what it takes you. You know, you don't just walk out in the woods. I mean, people think, oh, you're in Alaska. There's probably like giant herds of caribou everywhere, and the salmon are just like always there. And no, like there's a little time when salmon are around. There's sometimes when you might find a herd of caribou way up north. You got to go for that. But there's also most of the year there's nothing. The moose, they're very they're they're hard to find during hunting season often. Anyway, I'm learning a lot about them, and for a moose, just to cut straight to your question, um, I've been on one successful moose hunt. So one year, me and a friend um, got a bull moose, and splitting that half and half. So his family had half, my family had half, and then I gave a bunch away to another family that came to help us process it. Um, that has fed my family of three of us for a year and a half. I'm just about.
Oh man.
I'm almost down to. I actually have like probably maybe 5 pounds of moose left from not
Wow.
this
And that
fall,
was
but
and
the
that was
fall
like
before.
1/3 of it.
It's closer to pretty close to half.
Pretty close to half.
So
Year and a half.
this
Wow.
animal this animal was, I mean, it wasn't the biggest moose I've ever seen, but it was a big mature bull moose. I don't know if it weighed 1,100 pounds or maybe 1,000. So it's like it's as big as a horse, you know? Like you go up next to a moose and at the shoulder, like that's probably this high on me. Um, and it's incredible and it takes an incredible amount of work. Um, but yeah, a friend of mine, we were looking at hunting. I'd gone out a little earlier in the season and didn't have any luck. And then we got together and went out and we go out in canoes and put in the river and float down. And we stop and do.
Did you go on your own for the first time?
I've hunted my on my own just for some short day hunts, and then I also typically I try to go with a partner. This last year I hunted for almost a week or more on my own, um, and that's the kind of situation where if I were to get one, if by myself, it would have to be very ideal circumstances for me to do all the work myself. Like it would have to be like, oh yeah, I shot it real close to the river and I can quarter it up into pieces and get it to my boat. Probably what I would be doing is trying to get in touch with a friend who would come in and help me at that point.
Right. Right. That was where I was getting with that, because like, man, to deal with that big animal all on your own and then extract it from where you shot it, that would be chore.
Yeah, yeah. It took with two of us on that moose. It took us a couple days. Um,
Whoa.
we had yeah we sh-
And what were the temperatures? Were there not were you not risking the meat spoiling if it
uh,
was like?
no, it was so the hunt here. It's an interesting hunt here. It's very highly controlled, and it's called a level 2 subsistence, tier 2 subsistence hunt, which means you have to live in Haines or one of the very nearby communities to be able to get a tag for it. They give out 25 permits, and no, sorry, they give out about I think it's 2 to 250 permits, and it's a 3 week long season. When the season opens, you have to check your moose in when you get one with the Department of Fish and Game, and they count those, and it's allowed to go to 25 moose. So once 25 moose have been shot, they close the season. Either that or 3 weeks. If it goes to 3 weeks and there's only 20, that's it. It's closed. There's also a lot of antler restriction. So, which is, I think, one of the most challenging parts about this hunt. You'll talk to hunters and they'll go out and they'll see, sometimes you'll see 5 to 10 bull moose in a day, and none of them are illegal moose.
There's some regulations on the brow tine on the antlers, right?
Yeah, it has to either be a spike or fork on one side, or it has to have 3 brow tines on at least one side, or it has to be over 50 inches wide from tip to tip. So you're out in the field, even if you get close to a moose, you have to spend a lot of time looking at this thing with your binoculars or your spotting scope or whatever, trying to figure out if it's a legal moose. Because if it's not a legal moose and you shoot it, you bring it in, you're required by law to harvest the entire moose, bring it in, and then it gets donated to charity, and there will also be charges filed against you for illegal take of a moose. If you report it, they tend to, go easier on you.
Yeah, that's what I heard. That usually when you're kind of self-report and say like, "Yep, I screwed up. I make it," because I guess it can be just an honest mistake.
Yeah, it's can be a really hard judgment call, but it's really exciting. It's incredibly exciting to be out in the woods and hear these animals. I'm just starting to learn to call them. On my one of my first hunts, I actually found a shed antler. I didn't have a good system yet for raking trees to call them in, and I found a piece of a shed antler. And so me and my buddy, we were walking around, we found like some fresh sign, and I was like, this is it. Like I know it just feels moosey. There's gotta be a moose around here. And so we took that shed antler and I said, yeah, rake that tree. Just hammer that thing. And so he's back there just raking this tree. And sure enough, within about 5 seconds from when he quit doing that, I heard this moose stand up maybe 100 yards away, and it walked straight through the brush. It was like a jungle. Like the brush was 8 feet high, and you could hear this thing just, and then I could see its antlers above the brush. And we didn't know what to do. We were like, oh God, what do we do? Here it comes. I'm sitting there, I had my rifle, and he didn't have he wasn't hunting, he didn't have a permit. So he was out just helping me. And he's like, what am I going to, get behind the tree, hide behind that tree. And so this moose comes in, and I called it right in to within, it was 18 yards. And just incredible. Like I said, it's as big as a horse, and it has a rack, as big as my arm span on it, and just magnificent. And it came in and it went right behind this bush perfectly. And the whole time I'm trying to look at it to see if it has the right brow tines. And and I'm looking, I can't quite tell. I can see one side pretty good.
And your heart is pumping,
Oh,
and you need to figure out your freaking protein on the moose.
oh yeah, right. Yeah, it's just like adrenaline out the window, trying to breathe. It's do yoga, breathe, pranayama. Now you gotta calm down, and comes in and went right behind this tree, and we just sat there and watched it for a while, and eventually it walked away, and I didn't think it was a legal moose, but I also hadn't gotten a really good look at the other side, so we were able actually to come back around to it, and ended up it left, and then we went and I was able to find it, and I thought I'd gone down towards this river, and so I snuck through, and I was in this grass about 3 feet high, and it came back up the hill and ended up about, I don't know, 8, 10 feet away from me. And I just kind of sat down a little bit in the grass and didn't move. And I was up downwind, and so I got to sit there with this big old bull moose, 10 feet away, and he never spooked. He never realized that I was there. Finally, he turned his head the other way, and I could see that he wasn't legal. So then, after a little bit of just being really still, he just laid down right there. He bedded down and took a nap, and I snuck out backwards really quietly and slowly. And for me, that kind of a hunt like that, even though I didn't shoot an animal, I didn't that part of it didn't happen, but it was that's a complete hunt for me. Like the excitement and the connection to bring this animal in, to get to see it, and then later to get to spend time next to it, and also to be able to leave this animal totally, it was undisturbed, and for me that feels really good. Like, for me, that was a successful hunt.
Absolutely. And listen, so whoa, a couple of questions. First of all, so is the whether it's legal or not legal, is it not depending on the size, on the or age? Because I would imagine that this big of a moose, this has to be legal. So is it not so is the legal requirement only loosely related to how old or how big is the animal?
So you're exactly right. It is related to the age of the animal, and it's related to fish and game monitoring those moose populations. And what you're doing is, if you take out the young, the spike fork, those little guys, they're not breeders. They're not breeding yet. And then you're leaving the bulls that are essentially in the prime of their life.
Okay, so you're taking the ones that not breeding yet, and those who are already past their prime, who are already not breeding.
And well, those big guys, either the 50-inch or the 3-brow tine, they're probably still breeding, but they have probably, most likely, they have already bred, and their genetics are already in the gene pool, and they've been doing that for a while. And then, like you said, some of it is once they start getting real old, those are your big, huge moose. And so the idea is that those moose have already bred, and their genetics have gone on and passed on. And so they've produced a lot of moose. And so to take them out of the pool is gonna, to take them out, but keep those bulls that are in more of the prime of their life in the herd is going to maintain the health of that population.
So that big giant moose, it still could get bigger. So it was just
yeah. The moose that I saw. So the moose that I was just telling that story, that hunt about, was not a legal moose to shoot. In his prime, probably breeding lots of cows or here and there for however many years. The one that we did harvest the next season, it was a legal bull, and I'm sure it was breeding. When we found him, he had a herd of or a harem of, I can't remember. I think he might have had 6 or so cows with him. So he was, you know, of breeding capability for sure. But you're just taking fewer of those out.
Yeah, and this is so another because I heard this how this saying that people have funny stories about bears, but no one has a funny story about moose or something like that. So what was it? Was it dangerous? Was it when it was coming towards you? Towards you? Was he just curious, or was it like a pissed off and was trying to like sort out the problem?
Oh yeah, pissed off because I went right into his zone where he was trying to attract cows, and I made the sound that said, "I'm a big bull and I'm here to take your cow." That's what it sounded like to him, and he came over and said, "Oh, I don't think so. I'll come over there and whoop your butt." So that's essentially what was going on. So
Oh man.
yeah, and I haven't had any bad experiences yet with a moose, but I've definitely talked to a handful of hunters here who have told me stories about being chased around the tree, being chased by a moose, and having moose either almost stomp on them, because I think in Alaska, moose injure and kill almost as many people as bears do. So they're definitely they're a formidable creature.
Not the ones to mess around.
Yeah.
Hmm. Oh man. So you're and so you finally the following season you got your moose.
Yeah, I was able to, yeah, me and a buddy were able to harvest a moose together.
Right.
And
Wow, that's the story.
yeah, it
Listen,
was
man. So
really neat.
yeah. So just to go to the list. So you have a moose
Mhm.
available for harvest.
Yep.
What else? Caribou.
Uh, Caribou, and for caribou, you have to go quite a ways north from here. You can go up to probably the closest to us would be near Delta Junction, up in back into the main part of Alaska, and that would be about I can't remember if it's an 8 or 10 hour drive, or farther
So
north
is it
from
is
there.
it does it qualifies as not really viable option for food source?
I have hunted and harvested a caribou. That was might have been my first second animal that I harvested in Alaska was a caribou with my bow, and that was up on the north slope. So up off they call it the Hall Road, but it's the road that goes along the Alaska pipeline all the way up to the ocean, and then goes all the way to Valdez. But so up on the north slope, I I was able to successfully harvest a caribou with my bow there. So, and people do it from here. You know, people will go up north and hunt caribou, for sure. So that's within reason. A lot
We
of
go
people,
we get back to the caribou and we get
yeah,
back to bow hunting for sure.
yeah,
But what other you also have like goats, mountain
yeah.
goats, and bear that we know that you haven't hunted, but this is option to hunt bear,
Yep.
goats, what sheep, but probably sheep the tag situation and permits is very difficult.
Um, for an Alaska resident, sheep's not that hard. You'd have to go a little
Okay,
ways north again. The sheep live farther interior and a little ways north.
but the
Um,
hunt is super hard for sheep.
uh, yeah, it can be. Yeah, it's challenging. In Alaska, you can get an over-the-counter tag, so it doesn't cost me anything to get that tag. And there's an open season that I can go hunt. If you use a guide service,
Okay.
they are often very expensive, and out of state would be expensive.
Oh, gotcha. So this is for residents. So
Yeah,
again, like if you're a resident, then it's all okay.
yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So here I can hunt. I can hunt moose, mountain goat. There are deer, Sitka black-tailed deer. The nearest huntable population is about 15 miles south of here, and black bear and brown bear. Um, yeah, that's about it for the big game. And then there's small game.
Wow, man, that's
And grouse. One of my favorite is to
That's
hunt
what.
grouse.
Oh, and grouse.
Yeah,
Yeah, birds as well.
yeah.
Huh.
So
Yeah.
my I, one,
And which one? Which one? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think I really enjoy hunting all of them. I think mountain goat hunting is my favorite. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah, because I mean, it's the mountains here are rugged. They are steep and rugged, and it's a lot of work. It's hard to get up to tree line. It's not that far up, but it's a lot of work to get up there. Once you get up there, it's like it's my favorite place to be. I love being in the mountains. I love being up high. The goats, they go to the hardest places you can go. They go to the steepest cliffs and the hardest places, and it's really neat to hunt them. For me, it's a spot and stalk hunt, and I think for most people. So they're not super hard to see. It's hard to find a mature billy for sure, but
Yeah, that's what I heard. That there's some limits that when you if you harvest a nanny, then for like 2 years or something, you cannot go for a hunt, and
yeah,
it's very difficult to spot. You're looking at the base of the horns or something, and it's like,
yeah. There are some. It depends on the area and the population. Here they monitor them really closely, and um, so you can hunt a billy or a nanny, fish and game, and it's kind of becoming the culture that folks are really pushing towards just hunting billies. Um, and that's what I think a lot of people try to do that, but then it makes it so that if you make the mistake and you harvest a nanny, you're not going to lose your license or something like that.
mhm.
And some people do still hunt the nannies, and that's their choice. But yeah, it's really hard to tell the difference on the horns between a billy and a nanny. I've spent hours, like hours, very close to goats, hidden, watching them with binoculars, and you'll look at them on one angle and you're like, "Oh, that's definitely a billy," and then it turns the other way and you're like, "No, no, that antler, it's kind of there, that horn, it's skinny. No, that's a nanny. No, it's big." you know. And sometimes you can see one and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's obvious." If you're lucky enough, my first goat, I was able to watch it urinate, and that's a very obvious difference between the way that the billy and the nanny urinate. So I was able to go, oh, okay, there. I just watched that happen. That's a billy. Great, let's go.
Mhm.
Um,
How often they urinate?
I don't
I don't
know.
know, because is the question is like, is it like it's a matter of like you're just gonna stick around for long enough to be sure, or that they can go like 3 days
I,
without urinating? So that's not.
I'm not sure. I think Yeah, I think I don't know. I've some goats I've seen. I'm like walked up. Oh, I watched that one urinate. Oh, okay, let's go. And other goats I've sat there and watched them for 8 hours and haven't seen them urinate. So
Okay,
you
okay,
can't
but that's
bank
a
on
good tip.
that.
I never heard about that. That like you'll see them urinate, then you can tell easily. Of course,
Well,
that's
you
interesting.
can't see their genitals, but the billy will stand up with his. He'll put his chest up and his legs forward and his legs straight back, and he urinates like that. And the nanny will squat. She'll squat her back end down and urinate. So, and I watched a goat urinate one time, and I was like, oh, that's a billy then. And it was a nanny, but because of the slope of the hill behind her, it looked like she was standing. So you can't. That's the thing with goats. You can't bank on one thing. You have to figure out like horns, if you can watch them urinate. Some of their body shapes are different, but then sometimes you'll be like, that's a billy. And you're like, no, it's a big nanny. So,
Hmm.
but definitely I think my favorite hunt is for goats. I really enjoy that. I've wanted to do it with a bow, but I've been limited on time. So I take my rifle, and kind of funny because the last two that I've taken, I could have taken them with the bow. I was close enough. I was like, "Oh yeah, this is definitely bow range. Yep, we got it." But so I think this year I'm gonna really set my goal, and I'm gonna really get my bow tuned well and practice up, and I'm gonna do what I can. I'm gonna try and do more scouting this season for goats, and try and set myself up to see if I can get one with a bow.
Okay, so listen, so let's talk about bow hunting, because this is really how we get to talk. And
Right.
obviously there is like as usual in those cases we could sit here and talk for 3 hours straight. um but so let's switch gears a little bit, and let's talk about bow hunting.
Hmm.
And what I am particularly interested in is your views on how that compares to hunting with a rifle,
Hmm.
and especially in a welfare aspect of the harvest of the kill, let's say. And obviously I'm coming from the perspective of European hunter,
Yeah.
where only in a very few, not only very few countries, but few even regions within those countries, bow hunting is legal. Where I live and where most of our listeners live, Ireland, UK, it's straight up illegal,
Hmm. Hmm.
on the animal welfare basis. So since you are obviously living close to nature, and you're clearly a person who is very much connected with the animals and understand and value them, as a living creatures,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
have that connection. And you hunted with both with a bow and with a rifle.
Yeah.
um just to kick us off, how would you compare the hunt and then the kill itself,
Hmm.
uh with a rifle and with a bow?
The bow takes more time and more effort typically, because you do have to get so much closer. And so I think one of the things that, as a bow hunter, I would say that this is a this is a huge focus for any bow hunter, is shot placement, because you have to focus on that so much, because that's what depends on your kill, but also your ethical kill or not. You're using a projectile that's going to cut. And so that is what you need. And you need to put that in the right place to cause that animal to die. So shot placement for a bow hunter is more important even than for a rifle hunter. A rifle kills by concussion, right? It's so much force, so much force impacting that animal. It's breaking bones, it's shattering things, it sends a huge shock wave through the entire animal. Um, it does a lot of damage in that regard. And so that impact, that shock is huge. If I put my if I'm trying to shoot a deer and my arrow is off by this much, I might not hit vitals, and now I've wounded a deer instead of killing it. If I put my rifle this far off, chances are I'm still going to have a kill shot, or at least a shot that I can follow up, just because there's so much impact force. So how would I compare those two kills? Is, I feel, for me, so we've been talking about being close to animals in the natural world. For me, when I go out and hunt with my bow, I feel closer. I am closer, and I have to be closer. For me, that's on an energetic level, a connection level, and a physical level. Literally, I got to get closer. I have to be quieter, because I'm closer, and I'm. You often hear of hunters talk about the red zone. When you get in within the red zone for an animal, that's where it's going to start picking you up. For a bow, you have to be in that animal's red zone. You're close. And so they're really good at surviving. If they hear you, they smell you, whatever, it can give it away. So it's a higher level. Also, it's a to me it's a more natural, almost more gentle way of hunting, because when I let my arrow go, it makes a little bit of noise. It's not even as loud as a stick breaking in the woods. And if I hit that animal and I hit it cleanly where I'm trying to hit, sometimes it'll go right through that animal and it will jump, and maybe it won't even feel that it's been hit because my broadhead is so sharp. I had one deer where that happened. It was a shot that went right where I wanted to. It ended up passing between ribs and through part of the heart and the lungs. That deer jumped once about 5 yards and stood there for 5 seconds and expired. Like, I don't know that deer ever knew what happened to it. Um, that being said, I've also had
This is interesting. I heard that many times. So from your experience, um, because I always thought that this is like once every now and then an oddball situation where bow hunter shoots the animal and the animal doesn't know what hit him, and stands there and looks, or just goes back to grazing and then expires, right? I thought, but
Mhm.
then when I talk with bow hunters, it almost happened to every single one of those. So
Mhm. Mhm.
is that like an oddball situation, or is it? It seems to me like it's maybe not very common, but at least it's not nothing unusual to have that sort of reaction or lack of.
I think that while it's not the rule with hunting, it doesn't happen all the time. Um, that's what you're striving for. And when you get a shot that's really well placed and works out, I think that can be an outcome that happens, you know,
Regularly.
regularly. Yeah. Um,
Hmm.
I think the more common is that you're gonna shoot that animal and it's gonna take off running. Um, it takes a little while for an animal who's been hit and had its lungs or its heart or whatever part of it cut for that to die, and they'll go anywhere from typically 50 yards and up to 100 yards. But they say that typically, if you've hit an animal and hit it fairly well, you will find that animal within 100 yards.
So overall, would it be fair to say? I don't want to put the word in your mouth, but would it be fair to say that you feel like kill with a bow is more humane, more, well, don't want to say
So
pleasant because it's unpleasant, but
yeah, I think it's interesting because it doesn't always happen that way. It happens where you shoot an animal and it takes a while for it to die. Um, I also don't think that that's probably a terrible way to go. I think that with a rifle, it's it's often, but not always, very quick. It's a lot of shock. And when we think about, if you want to think about like what is humane, so humane, I looked up the definition of humane the other day, and part of it was compassion for uh, X. So for another person, for an animal, and animals was one of the description. So if we're talking about compassion, which is a theme for me for sure, um, I think of that animal, and my goal is to have the quickest, cleanest, easiest kill I can. It doesn't always work out that way for sure. However, that's always my goal. I think with a bow, when that happens, to me, it seems more humane. I've also had quick, clean kills with a rifle, and that feels more. It seems it's more violent because of the significant shock. However, I also believe that those kills are quick and therefore humane.
as a hunter who hunts with both, right, and like
Mhm.
both are for you legitimate and way of hunting, do
Yeah.
you understand where people are coming from saying that bow hunting is inhumane or not humane enough compared to a rifle, or does that strikes you as a you know hard argument to make that you would.
That's a hard argument to make. I would disagree with that statement. Um, I think that bow hunting. I think of, first of all, rifle or bow hunting in the wild versus an animal that's living in a farm and being processed that way. And when I think of that kill, I think of this animal that I hunted has lived a free life. It has eaten, all this good food, all this natural food that it's eating. It drank clean water. It lived here. It died quickly, whether that was by my bow or my rifle. And to me, that is a humane life. Um, if I were to live a life, I would hope to live wild and die quickly at the hands of a predator, at the hands of a skilled predator. I hope that if I went out that way, I'd be pretty happy. Um, and I don't find that hunting with the bow is definitely not less humane than with a rifle. A rifle is a violent, hard hitting, huge impact way to die. It is quick, or it has the potential to be quick. And again, it's not always. Just because you hunt with a rifle doesn't mean it's a quicker death. If your shot placement is off, that animal, you shoot its leg off. That's not a humane way to die. That's not a quick way to die. Another thing that I was thinking about, Tommy, that might help shed a little light into this is we talk about living and being part of nature, that we are human animals. When I pick up my bow or my rifle and I walk out with the intention to go hunt and harvest an animal, I'm stepping into an ancient, still going relationship with the natural world, quote unquote, with the animals. And these are animals that deal with being hunted every day by other animals. I'm taking my place in that cycle, in that cycle as a predator. As a human, I'm a predator. My eyes are positioned in the front of my head so that I can focus on one animal that is my prey. Eons of evolution have designed me to be a predator. When I pick up my bow or my rifle and walk into the woods to hunt, I'm now a predator in this situation. I happen to, at times, be a very effective predator. I also have the technology that allows me to kill things relatively quickly and relatively cleanly. If you think about a caribou or a moose out in the wild, its number one predator is a wolf. To take down an animal of that size, a wolf doesn't go in there and kill that animal by itself in 30 seconds. It goes in there with a pack of other animals, and once they are able to bite it on its butt long enough to start dragging it down as it runs through the creek and it tries to get away, and enough animals are able to drag it down, the wolves start tearing that animal apart and eating it while it's still alive. They're not going for a quick clean kill and waiting for it to die. They are eating it, they're ripping it apart. That's how they kill it. So if you want to talk about a humane kill, the way I do it is probably much more humane than any other predator is going to do it. So that puts
No
it in
doubt about
perspective.
it.
If we want to eat meat, that's the role that we have to accept. And I feel like we have to accept that responsibility and the weight that that carries, because it is significant to take another life. And just because I go buy something from the grocery store, I almost wish there was a way for it to have some of that gravity. The feeling that I have when I take the life of an animal and it has come from my hand and passed into, I feel that it passes to me, the responsibility passes to me then to do as much as I can to honor and respect that animal. When I go to the supermarket, I'm more removed from that situation because I don't have to kill it.
Someone already done that work for you. Listen, Zephyr. What would you say to the argument that because bow hunting is so much more difficult than the potential for hunter to being either not skilled enough to make the quick humane kill, or potential to take a shot that a hunter has no business taking, and probability of wounding animal is higher, and therefore like I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here, but obviously this is part of the conversation. And even you said earlier that even if you miss, your shot is not perfectly placed with a rifle, because of that concussive force, you probably get the at least animal mortally wounded, which poses questions in itself, like, is this humane, right? Versus an animal. So I'm curious, how would you weigh on the, if you take into equation the fact that the bow hunting is so much more difficult, and therefore the probability of screwing up shot, wounding animal, taking bad shot, taking not composing yourself and keeping your restrained, plays into the fact that, okay, your wounding rate will be higher, you're more likely to wound the animal, you're more likely to not have a clean humane kill, versus rifle, right? Because this is another part of an argument, like, okay, in the perfect world, yes, but then we're not living in the perfect world. How would you weigh on that?
What strikes me initially there is, whether it's with a rifle or a bow, I think it comes down to the hunter, and it's the difference of a shot that a hunter will take. Their skill level with either piece of equipment, and what shot they are either comfortable with, or how ethical is that shot with either one. So I think a lot of it comes to that, and I don't think that it's so much of a difference between the equipment that's being used. It's how it's being used, because I can take a shot with my bow that is a very, very ethical, within my range, good shot, wait for the right angle, and it all lines up. I can do that with my bow at, say, 40 yards, and that's great, easy. And with my rifle, I can do the same thing, and maybe that's at 200 yards, and it's still a very clean, it's the same setup. I can also do the same thing where then I can take my bow and I can be like, I'm going to try and hit that deer at 70 yards. That for me would not be an ethical shot, because that's outside of my shoot range. Same thing. I can take my rifle and I can go, I'm going to go shoot that deer at 500 yards. My bow will shoot 70 and put that arrow exactly where I want it if I can hold it. My rifle will shoot 500 yards and do the exact same thing at that range. For me, those second two shots are not ethical shots. So I think it actually might come down more to the ethics and the shot, the shot that is being taken, as to that situation.
I also say that one of the arguments that I often bring in these conversation is that, because as a hunter, you or whoever the hunter is knows that it's so much more difficult to hunt with a bow, they usually will put more effort and more hours into training and preparation. While I feel like with a rifle, quite often, you know, they unless they're in a gun club and making shooting competition or something like that, then I know for a fact about hunters who just taking like a 5 shots in the season, and these are 5 shots on the animal.
Yeah.
That's it, because it has this perception that it's easier. It's like, all right, I just need to align my scope and so on. While bow hunter, they will get the reps in. So that's also my argument. I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel like a bow hunters, by the sheer fact that this is so much more difficult, they tend to train more and be better trained at the craft.
Yeah, I think that comes down to an inherent difference in the equipment. A rifle is something that it's actually, interestingly, in this day and age, it's a simpler tool.
Yeah.
It's a simpler tool. It's something that can be set up, right? You can get your rifle set, you can get your scope set, you can dial it all in. It's easier to isolate the variables. You can put it on a sled and set it and make sure that your zero is on with your scope at this yardage, or your sights are in and your bullet matches this. And you can do that. With a bow, it is tuned to that person and is set to that person, and much more of the energy that you put into that is from drawing the bow and the person and holding and all this. That's where the energy for that arrow comes from. In a bullet, it comes from a cartridge with powder in it. That's much easier. That's less variable. So I can go out, I can get a rifle sighted in, and I can hand it to you, and you can go out and use it, and it will perform exactly how it did when I had it.
Yeah.
With a bow, I can't get my bow tuned to me where it's functioning perfectly and hand it to you, because it's not going to fit, because you're a different size. Your draw is different. The energy that you're putting into it is slightly different. There's variables. So it's more complex with a bow. It does take more tuning. So therefore, I would say, yeah, it's easier to pick up a rifle and get it tuned and go shoot. So you can do that. I spend less effort on my rifle than I do on my bow to get the same results.
I think this is the basis of the discussion, right? That being it easier doesn't necessarily make it more humane at the outcome. I think this is the line where the opponents of bow hunting would disagree with you and me, and try to kind of take that part into like, okay, what is the probability that someone will wound the animal, because I guess the whole argument hinges on the wounding rates, which arguably are higher for bow. But I think then again, where I agree with you, it's like it's down to a hunter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unfortunately, one of the just to wrap this up, I think that one of the unfortunate things is like the official European hunting organization, they said something like they support bow hunting as long as local organizations within each country are fine with that and build up. And from what I can see, like no one wants to touch it even. So it's unfortunate, and it's even unfortunate because there are bow shooting clubs.
Mm-hmm.
There is like a sport bow shooting. People have a compound bow and they target shooting.
Targets, yeah.
But just somehow that thing is not making way. So hopefully discussions like this will maybe
Yeah.
at least start the conversation.
Yeah. I I I feel for you. That sounds really hard. Like it would be really challenging to be told like, oh, here's a weapon that has been used for eons of time to get food, and you can't use that because somebody else doesn't think that somebody else's perception is that it doesn't kill quickly enough or effectively enough.
Yeah, and you made the excellent point, Zephyr, as well, that the humane kill is not necessarily the quickest, right? It's I think this is quite often where the argument is like, oh, because of concussive force and so on and so on, like that not necessarily means quicker doesn't necessarily means more humane, right?
Right.
Let's lob the grenades at the animal, right? That will kill them quickly, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like I mean, yeah, it's a tricky one. And if maybe is it less humane if I shoot a caribou and it goes and it walks off a little ways and it lays down and it takes a couple hours to die as it lays in its home environment, um, and dies peacefully lying down and expires that way? Is that not a good way to go? Is that not humane? Or is it actually humane to be killed quickly with such massive shock that it ripples through the entire animal's body, crushing bones and other things?
Yeah. Zephyr, listen, just to finish on a slightly lighter note,
Yeah.
because we went out deep and kind of dark a little bit.
Yeah.
Listen, are there any words of wisdom? Anything you would like to leave our listeners and viewers with, as the one who is living such a fortunate life of connection with nature and subsistence living as much as possible? What wisdom or what advice would you give to all the listeners and viewers of Tommy's Outdoors?
Be thankful for the things that are good in your life. Take the moments to feel how blessed and how fortunate we are with whatever food and whatever water we have, and to be thankful for what we do have. And remember that as much as we can make it in any little way, that we are human animals, that we are part of this natural world. We're all part of this same world, that we're not actually separate from the outside or the animals that we live on this planet with. And so, and I believe it is I believe it is I believe it is my charge, my duty to do what I can to respect them, to respect the natural world, and to do what I can to take care of it and preserve it and protect it in whatever the best way that I can.
Well said. Well said. Zephyr, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. It's been great conversation.
Thank you, Tommy. I really appreciate it. It's been a joy talking with you.